Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Level Up English podcast, the best place to come to practice the English language, learn about the British accent and culture with me, your host, Michael Lavers. I am super happy and super excited for today's episode because I'm talking with a special guest, and this is Alastair Budge from Leonardo English. And I can't say enough how much I enjoyed our conversation. I won't say too much about it now because we do talk quite a lot about Alastair's podcast in today's episode. But very briefly, Alastair has a podcast called English Learning for Curious Minds. And as you maybe can tell from the title of this podcast, it really is just Alastair following his curiosity in each episode. So I was immediately interested in this concept, in this idea. So I invited him on to my podcast to talk about it. And we just covered some of the topics that I found interesting that Alastair has covered over the last couple months. And hopefully it can be a good preview as well. We have a lot in common, actually. We both started our podcast around the same time. Alastair started in 2019 and now has listeners from all around the world. So I imagine if you like my podcast, when I look at kind of these random topics to help you improve your English, I think you might like Alastair's podcast as well. But anyway, I really don't want to delay for too long today. I just want to remind you that if you need some extra help following this podcast, you might be interested in getting the transcripts, which are all available on the website. So if you go to levelupenglish.school and then you click on the members button at the top of the page, you can access podcast transcripts, vocabulary lists, and many, many more courses and things to help you improve your English. And it's also a great way to support my podcast as well. But anyway, let's get into the episode now. Hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I am very happy today to be joined by Alastair Budge. How are you today?
I'm fantastic, Michael. How are you?
I'm very good as well. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your podcast and what you're up to, because it's quite similar to my podcast in many ways. So I think the listeners would be interested to hear.
Sure. So I have a podcast for intermediate to advanced English learners. It's called English Learning for Curious Minds. And I started it, I think, at a similar kind of time to you, I think. The first episode was published in December of 2019. So it's just over 5 years, which seems like a very long time. And the idea behind it was really to kind of tell fun stories, talk about interesting things in English in an accessible way. So my background is really as a language learner. So I studied languages at university. I've lived abroad for quite a while. I speak Italian with my wife. I'm learning Swedish, and I've got quite a long background, let's say, in language learning. And one of the things that always frustrated me as a language learner is, you get to that level where still kind of native level, like news and books and films can be a little bit tough, a little bit hard. But textbooks and material that is specifically for language learners can feel a little bit simple and repetitive. And so I wanted something that kind of bridged that gap, that still was interesting and kind of got me excited about learning, but was graded in a way that made it more helpful to me as a learner. So kind of coming from my own personal experience, I wanted to create something like that for people who were in a similar situation but were learning English. And yeah, that's how the podcast came about.
That's amazing. I love the idea so much that it's not just teaching English. Like, here's the grammar, here's what you need to know. I think a big word for your podcast that we can talk about today is curiosity. So you're kind of following your curiosity, it seems like, and just picking almost like random topics that you find interesting, presumably, and the listeners might as well, and using that to help improve people's English, which I think is a much more, I don't know, it's much more fun, but it's kind of authentic way of learning, more natural way of learning. So I think it's a great idea.
It's certainly more fun for me,
yeah,
because you're completely right that I just kind of choose topics semi at random that I think this is an interesting story. This person has an interesting life. This is an interesting idea to talk about at the moment. Go away and do a bunch of research, try and kind of figure out a way to talk about it in a way that makes sense, but is also interesting. And what normally happens is, as I'm kind of doing that kind of research and kind of exploring this subject in more detail, I find other things that are like tangentially interesting. And I think, okay, well, that's a good thing. I'll put that on the list of potential episodes. And I research that, and there's something else that crops up. So I now have this, absolutely massive list of episodes that I want to make. I just checked before we went on this, we jumped on this call, and I think it's like 639 subjects that are kind of in the hopper. And some of them won't make it because I'll start and then realize that actually something that I thought was potentially interesting, I can't find a way to turn it into an episode that I feel proud of. And there'll obviously be lots of new ones that are added too, as as I discover new things. So it really is a kind of vehicle for my own curiosity, and I think that is just a great way to learn. As I said, I'm learning Swedish at the moment, and part of what I'm doing is I go to a Swedish class. I live in Sweden, and the Swedish government provides like free Swedish classes for all immigrants up to I think it's something like B1 or B2 level, as a way to try to get newcomers to the country to integrate properly and learn the language and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, I have a wonderful teacher. She's great, but I think she's a little bit constrained by the material that's provided. But sometimes she gives amazing things. So yesterday evening, we have these 3-hour long lessons from, it used to be 6 p.m. till 9 p.m. on a Monday, which is quite a long time. But she gave us this text about like Swedish immigration to the United States in the like latter half of the 19th century. And it's like, this is really interesting. This is something I didn't know about before at all, or I had some kind of very base knowledge about, but it was super interesting. And, I really wanted to go through and understand all of it, kind of go through and figure out all the words and really engage with the material in a way that I just wouldn't have if it was a more generic text about something that didn't seem so interesting to me. So really that's kind of what I'm trying to do with the podcast. And yeah, it's been 5 years, over 500 episodes now. So it's been a while, but luckily I'm still not running out of topics.
Yeah, you've almost got an infinite amount. It's amazing. And yeah, I feel like the best, I don't know if this is always true, but I think generally to be a good teacher, it certainly helps to be learning a language yourself, and you kind of know what is enjoyable, what works for you, and you can use that in your own teaching, of course. Yeah, I think that's something that I always try to consider as well. And I guess we could also mention the name of your podcast now. Your brand name is Leonardo English, right? And the podcast is English Learning for Curious Minds.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's all there.
English Learning for Curious Minds is the name of the podcast. Like Leonardo English is the kind of umbrella company. I have a few other things, a few courses, and another like narrative podcast as well, that I made a couple of years ago, I think, called Pioneers of the Continuum. Mm-hmm. But English Learning for Curious Minds is the kind of the core of it all, where it all starts. And Leonardo English, people often think my name is Leonardo, which I guess is a perfectly reasonable assumption, but it is not Leonardo. I don't have any any connection to anyone called Leonardo, but it is named after Leonardo da Vinci, who is, in my opinion at least, the sort of quintessential curious mind, someone who dipped his finger into lots of different things and was not afraid to just be a master of many different disciplines. And I think that's something that I try to embrace, that you don't have to just be interested in history or politics or sports or whatever. It's a perfectly good thing to learn a language, kind of dipping your feet into all these different subjects, because there's a lot of interesting stories about so many different things. And if you're just restricting yourself to kind of staying in one lane, then I think you're missing out on a lot of interesting opportunities for learning.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know. I get the sense it's quite rare these days to have that mindset. Like, of course, it's very good to specialize in one area. You can explore very deeply, and it makes a lot of sense if you want to be a teacher of some subject, or some kind of, become a doctor or something. But in many cases, as you said, there's benefits to covering a wide range of topics and expanding your mind. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's not encouraged in society in order to get a job. There aren't many jobs where you need to be spread yourself that thin across different topics. So it's nice to have stuff like this that can make it more interesting. And I remembered one thing. Sorry, I just before I forget, there's one thing I was going to say before, which was, I feel like there might be a gap in the market. I don't know if you'd ever consider doing this one day, but writing some books maybe in a similar way, because I love reading like graded readers. I don't know if you've used them for Swedish.
Yeah.
Where it's kind of like stories designed for language learners, kind of made to be slightly easier and not use like really obscure, difficult words. I feel like that they're often quite boring. Like they're often like fictional stories about characters that don't really interest me. And I'd love to have some more that were like random topics I find interesting, like some that you'd cover on your podcast. So maybe if you've got some time in the future, you can consider turning your episodes into books.
That is a fun idea. I do. I kind of make transcripts and vocabulary lists and like study packs for each episode. So perhaps that's an opportunity to expand and make something a little bit more permanent in the future. But I completely agree with what you were saying in terms of people being constrained and thinking that you have to be an expert in one particular thing rather than just exploring all of your talents and interests. I guess it's part of like a function of 21st century capitalism, that people become experts in particular things, and that's the most efficient use of everyone's time and labor. But it brought to mind this person that I would really like to make a podcast episode about, that I haven't done yet, but he keeps on cropping up in various different episodes, and I'd never heard of him. Maybe you'll have heard of him. He's called Cornelis Drebbel, and he was, I should say, a Dutch. I've got his Wikipedia page up here, so this is not some kind of photographic memory, but he was a Dutch engineer born in 1572, and the reason I mention him is because he was basically a kind of mad inventor, and he was invited by King James let's get this right, King James the First, I think, King James the First of England, so the Sixth of Scotland, to his court in Westminster to basically be a kind of mad inventor and try to come up with all sorts of inventions that could potentially help the British Navy. And he invented a basic version of like air conditioning. There was this famous time where he kind of convinced the king that he'd invented air conditioning. He invented a submarine that went, I think it traveled like 10 kilometers down the Thames, actually underwater. And this is in the year like 1610 or something.
Wow.
So it's like 300 years or so before the first real submarine was. And it was made out of wood. And there are various other things that he invented as well. But it's this kind of amazing idea that this person was, invited just to kind of tinker away and be knowledgeable about a sufficient number of things that he was able to come up with like two very, very different inventions and lots more that I don't know about. But I'm sure it will be super interesting. And the amount of people that we have like that nowadays is just very few in number because people are so specialized. Mm-hmm. But that does sound like my kind of job.
Yeah. I can't think of any situation where people would pay you to just sit around and think about things, because it doesn't generally make money, at least not for a long time. You need someone like an Elon Musk figure, right? Someone who's already got a lot of money that they can afford to spend time dabbling in other projects. But yeah, it's quite rare these days, as you said. And yeah, I think the Leonardo inspiration prompted me to want to ask you if there are any other people who you find inspiring. It could be people you spoke about in the podcast before, or just in general. I guess you could take it any way you want, but is there anyone that inspires you in life?
I guess there's lots of people that inspire me. I think in terms of, maybe it's easier to talk about like qualities that I've seen in people that I think are inspirational and make for pretty amazing stories. People who just continue doing something for a long time without any immediate kind of payoff or sense that they're kind of doing something that they're going to be rewarded for it. So there's this one episode I made about a guy. His real name I've forgotten, but he's called his kind of nickname was the Ice King. What was he called? Frederick Tudor, that's his name. And he was this kind of maniacal American who kind of decided that he was going to make a fortune by taking ice from kind of Boston and New England and transport it all around the world. And he had like huge, big blocks of ice. And he eventually built this sort of empire, taking ice even as far as India and Hong Kong, perhaps even Thailand, where you are. And obviously everyone told him he was completely mad and that this would all fail and it was a stupid idea. And eventually he kind of figured out how to do it, how to kind of pack the ice properly, how to store it once it got to the places, how to modify the ship so that they would be able to transport it properly, not fall over, and so on. And eventually, had great success. So I find those characters inspirational. I'm quite glad that I'm not really like them, because normally when the more research you do into these kind of people, the more you realize that they are often like terrible husbands and fathers and like neglecting of all of everyone around them. So there's when making these kinds of episodes, I'm always a little bit unsure as to how much to talk about their personal life, because in many cases they are just like really, it sound like not very nice people. It's normally men, really, not very nice men who are having affairs or kind of being very unpleasant to their children or their partners, and that's I'm not quite sure what the right amount of airtime to dedicate to that element is, because at the same time you don't want to be completely glorifying them, but it's a bit boring to be like, oh, by the way, we should acknowledge that this person was like didn't spend much time with their children or these kind of things, because it's just not quite as exciting. So yeah, my answer to the question of who's inspiring, I think what people like that have done is pretty inspiring, but I don't necessarily want to take inspiration from them in their personal lives. And that does seem to be a theme with almost all of them, all those kind of characters, which I guess it's very hard to do something great, kind of that's memorable, to build something that stands the test of time, and be home at 4 p.m. every day to put children in their bath and do those kinds of things. So yeah, that's what you're up against.
I love that answer. I think that's the perfect answer, because people, I guess naturally, like maybe it's a human thing. We like to put people up on a pedestal, which is like find someone to admire and kind of worship everything about them and respect every aspect of who they are. But yeah, everyone has maybe it's too strong to say dark side, or everyone has faults and imperfections, and I think it's much wiser to identify the traits you like rather than the entire person. And it also made me think, have you ever done an episode on Picasso?
No, I haven't. No, I know he had a super interesting life, and I've done a few episodes on artists, but the reason I haven't done as many as I would perhaps have liked to is because at the moment, at least, all the episodes are audio only, and with something like an artist or what else would be a good comparison? Let's just say an artist. It's really benefits from the visual element, because you can say, and then and that was the year he did painting X, Y, and Z, and show it to the person. Whereas if you're doing audio only, you kind of got to either assume that the listener knows what that painting is, which is not realistic, or you kind of describe it. Clearly, I would do a rubbish job of describing a painting. So I have not done as many of those. I've kind of shied away from them. But I think you're completely right that someone like Picasso has had such a amazing, interesting life that you could talk about his life. The one artist that I have done an episode on is Caravaggio, who had this amazing life where I think he was I'm going to get it a bit wrong because this was like 3 or 4 years ago, but he was like accused of murder, I think in Rome or so, and then he fled to Malta, which is this small island just south of Sicily, and it was like I knew about it because I lived in Malta. And he then got into some awful disagreement, I think killed someone else, and then had to flee again. And so that episode was about this kind of mad life of this clearly kind of criminal but brilliant artist. So he probably fits into the category of people who have done amazing things and been inspirational, but has his personal behavior is not something to emulate.
It's so interesting. That's kind of double side of people. I mean, the reason I thought of Picasso is because I once did, it was many years ago, but sometimes these things stick in your head. I taught an English lesson based on an article about Picasso, and it was taught, I think it was named like The Shadow Side or something like that, talking about the shadow side of success, where if you look at Picasso's success, like he made a ridiculous number of paintings in his life. Like the amount of works he made was just like staggering. And if you divide it by how many years he was alive, he was like non-stop painting. It's insane. So there's a lot of really good qualities, inspirational qualities about him. But then you look at his personal life, where, just as you said, he was cheating on his wife. He had many partners, lots of problems like that. I can't remember all the problems, but yeah, it just that spring to mind, because it's exactly as you said. Like, in order to get to that level of success, probably other areas in life are going to have to suffer. So I think it's nice to, as you said, nice to mention that, if nothing else, because people might have a unrealistic expectation otherwise that they can also reach that while having a happy family and going to the gym and stuff like that, you know?
Yeah. You say it's stuck in your mind, and I'm sure it's stuck in your students' mind as well, because you know, that's a more interesting and more memorable thing than a kind of standard text about someone going to a supermarket, or you know, what did they do on their holidays. I remember when I was at university in the summers, I taught English in China, and I was, you know, not giving any kind of training or anything. It was just like, in you go. And I just completely misjudged the students' level as well. And I remember trying to teach them I think we did a week where we were teaching George Orwell. And these were like 11-year-old kids. So I got it wrong, really. But I think they absolutely loved it. Some of them, it was just far too complicated. And there were some who were super, super interested, and we're going to go away and look up every word and so on. And I'm sure for those kinds of children, you know, given how interested they were and how they kind of wanted to like conquer that text, I imagine that's the kind of thing that will have stuck in their mind for quite a long time. Yeah, it's certainly stuck in mine. So that's kind of what that was, you know, almost 20 years ago. But what I'm trying to continue really with the podcast.
I see. That's a nice origin story. And I guess that the benefit of a podcast is, unlike in the classroom, the kids that aren't interested, you know, that not everyone's going to be interested. It's just, unfortunately, classrooms don't work that way. But of course, in a podcast, if people don't like that particular style, they don't have to listen. So you can only, you know, you can foster the audience who actually are interested in that topic, which sounds much more efficient and fun.
Yeah, and luckily there are, you know, however many millions of different podcasts that people can choose from. So I think if you're listening to a podcast and you think, I don't like this, then you're doing something wrong, because you should be choosing one that you like.
I've actually been there so many times where I'm listening to a podcast and I've been like listening every week for like several months or something, and then I'll just like take a step back in my mind and think, wait, I'm not really enjoying this. It's kind of a chore to listen. Like, why am I listening every week? And it takes like an embarrassingly long time to figure out that I'm not actually having fun. But yeah, it's important to ask yourself that question.
Yeah, and people, you know, I think different styles are complementary, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not that you know, let's talk, if we're talking about people who are wanting to improve their English, it's not like you just have one particular podcast that you listen to all the time. Most people, in my experience, they're listening to kind of 3, 4, 5, 6 different kinds of podcasts, because they're all giving them different types of things. Some are more conversational, some are narrative, some are talking about kind of news-related topics. Others are more kind of day-to-day stuff. Yeah, I'm talking about people, you know, exporting ice to India. So there's all sorts of different kinds of things that people can get from different shows. Talking again about my personal experience, I listen to probably 3 or 4 different podcasts in Swedish. Still at a much lower level than my podcast is in English. But there's one that I really like. That's like 3 minutes, and it's just it's called Litsvenska med Oscar. Like, and it's just a kind of narrative. This Swedish guy is probably in his mid-30s. Just he kind of talks about one thing in an episode. So today I'm going to talk about watching stuff on YouTube. Then tomorrow I'm going to talk about reading. Then I'm going to talk about buying clothes. And it's like very easy listening, and the fact it's so short means it's just super, super accessible. And it's completely in Swedish, no explanations in English or anything like that. But he talks slowly, he repeats stuff. There's another one where it's more conversational. There's another one which is the format is like a Scottish guy who's learning Swedish, who's being taught Swedish. So it's almost like you're kind of a fly on the wall in a lesson. So there's so many different formats, and I don't think people should be wedded to the idea that like I have to find this one and this is my one. I think people should listen to different ones, because they will get lots of value from different kinds of podcasts.
Exactly. That is exactly why we are not competitors, right? We can work together, and you can enjoy both our podcasts. So yeah, it doesn't have to be one or the other. So that works in our favor too.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. I did want to ask you, like, if you don't have a question, so if you don't have an answer for this, I can help my ideas. But I wanted to ask, what are some of the more, like, maybe some recent most interesting topics that you've covered on your podcast that come to mind now? Anything that like you were really invested in as you were researching or talking about it?
So I just finished doing a big mini series about something that is clearly a complicated and sort of in many ways dark subject, but that was like the rise of Vladimir Putin, and then the poisonings of Alexander Litvinenko and Sergei Skripal, these two Russian kind of agents in different kind of capacities who were poisoned in the UK. One killed in 2006, and the other was not killed. He survived. So that's like a super interesting. Super interesting challenge to try to address these subjects in a way that does them justice, without kind of spending like 10 hours like recording like a mammoth thing that goes through the entire life of Putin. And I know after that I'll get messages from people saying, "Oh, you didn't talk about this properly. You didn't talk about that." Which always happens with these slightly meatier ones. But that's just what happens. I did another one that I thought was super interesting on space mining, like asteroid mining. That came out, I think, last week, maybe. I record them quite a lot in advance, and then sort of out they come. So I always get a little bit confused about what's out and what's not out.
Me too. Yeah.
It's another kind of category of subjects that I really like. It's sort of like big, meaty, ongoing things that are not about an individual or a country in particular, but like fundamental things that could change the way in which the world works in 10, 50, 100 years. So that's like just a super interesting thing that it doesn't seem like there's a huge amount of kind of publicity about. Not obviously there are many articles and videos and research papers and so on, but it's the sort of thing that if it works, then in 100 years, the world in which we live on would be completely different. Stuff about declining fertility rates, I think, is super interesting as well. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot that I think I'm quite proud of doing. There have been quite a few times, I reckon, like maybe 10 or 20% of the episodes I write, I don't actually publish
Oh, wow.
because I think like I just don't feel I can do this justice, or like I record it and it's like, oh yeah, it's like that's not as interesting as I thought it was going to be. So most of the ones now I think I'm quite proud of. If I go back and listen to the ones that I made like 4 or 5 years ago, I think I would probably be squirming in my seat because I had never done this before, so I was practicing on the go, like anyone. But now I'm a bit more confident in my ability to kind of explain something in an interesting way. So yeah, there's been a few interesting ones.
Yeah. I mean, all of them sound so interesting to me. The pattern that I'm sensing there, or I'm noticing there, is maybe like really big events that is kind of overlooked by the news. Like declining birth rates is one I hear a lot about mostly on podcasts actually these days, which the news never seems to talk about. I don't know why, and not that I see anyway. And yeah, I think people kind of struggle to see how that will be a big problem. Because it seems like, well, that's good, the streets are always very crowded. I mean, less people would be good, or fewer people would be good. But I haven't heard that episode, but I imagine you spoke about possibly causing lots of problems and not enough workers and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's so my wife is from Italy, and I've got 2 kids, and it's sort of mad going to certain Italian towns. So she's from a town in the northeast of Italy, which is they say traditionally like a town of old people, and you do just walking around, you don't really see very many children at all. And my the kind of the reality is that Italy's got a pretty generous kind of pension system. You have I think something like 30% of Italian under 18s want to leave the country when they graduate, and they'll be left with the system where everyone who is kind of moving towards retirement now is expecting the same generous pension that people have been getting for kind of 10 to 20 years. You've got no young people, a very low number of births. So very few people who are going to be entering the workforce. And, this is a problem that's going to hit massively in 10 to 20 years time. And yeah, it's just a huge existential problem that people sort of talk about in like very theoretical terms, like, the fertility rate is 1.3 or whatever it is. And 1.3 obviously is a seems like a strange thing because someone can't have 1.3 children. You either have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. And so it seems kind of far away. And then Korea is even more extreme. I think it's like 0.7 or 0.8 or something like that. And I don't have any kind of unique insight into the reasons that it's particularly bad in Korea, other than what I've read in terms of extreme working hours and kind of pressure being put on children and so on. But yeah, like if these things continue for generations, then statistically, especially in countries with low levels of immigration, then the population just collapses, which is kind of mad to think that's a possibility. So yeah, I think I'm very interested in talking about these kinds of things, and doing as much research as I can do into them, and trying to present a kind of fair and balanced perspective without coming down heavily on any kind of side, really. Just doing my best to present kind of objective facts. And I think with fertility, with declining population, that's an objective fact. You can see how many people are being born. You can see how many people are in each age group, and you have I don't know if you know what I mean by those. What are they called? They're like population pyramid things.
Yeah,
where it's
pyramid.
and normally you have sort of, it's small at the bottom, and then it kind of goes up like that, and then decreases as people get older. And you have some countries now where you have tiny bits at the bottom where there's hardly any children being born, kind of going up there, and then it becomes a bit more like a rhombus, I guess. So yeah, it's a really interesting area to talk about, and I'm sure I'll probably end up making more episodes on that. Perhaps one specifically on South Korea. That'd be fun.
Yeah, I'd like to hear that one. I mean, what I know, like every generation, we like to think we're special. Like this time is special, and other times are less special. But I do find it interesting, like the possibility that around the time we're living now, it might be the most, like the biggest number of people on the planet at one time. I think it's predicted to get like 9 or 10 billion. I don't know what the current prediction is, but after that, it may never get to that level again. I mean, we don't know the future, but that's kind of weird to think about. This is a very unique time in that way.
Yeah, I think I think I can't remember exactly when it's projected to hit like 9 or 10 billion. I think it's at like 2040 or something like that in the next it's somewhere between the next like 15 and 30 years. And then I guess it's demographic modelers have got obviously not an easy job, but you can kind of see like the maximum amount of new people added to a population is likely to be, and then you sort of understand how many people are predicted to die every year, and you can figure it out relatively easily. It's not like some kind of exponential virus where people can, someone can magically have 10 children in a year. That's not going to happen. But it is funny to think that we might live in a time where the global population is at its maximum.
Yeah.
And what would it mean for it to be decreasing?
Yeah, there's so many questions that come up. I heard just the other day there was, well, I mean, honestly, I don't know where they sourced it from. I guess it was an article, but I heard on another podcast again that I think based on the current predictions, the current trajectory in Japan, it's something like by the year 2600, there's going to be just one child left, which is a really weird sentence. And I know it sounds very far away, but of course the problems are supposed to come long before that. But that's like the very end of population growth at that stage, I guess is what it means, which is very dystopian.
Because it's incredibly hard to migrate to Japan as a foreigner, right? So you have that's a kind of like a unique case study in terms of what happens to a population if you have declining birth rates and practically zero immigration. That's the situation. And then the countries in Europe in particular, where you have declining birth rates, but that's offset by relatively high levels of immigration. So you have the indigenous population. If there was zero immigration like there is in Japan, then you'd have a similar kind of situation in the UK and in practically all European countries, I believe, because none of they're all below two births per woman. So it's an interesting world.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, very lots to study. I mean, one more topic that really fascinates me at the moment, quite a a big topic at the moment is Ozempic, the Ozempic drug, which I know you did an
Yeah.
episode on not too long ago. Do you remember what you said about that? Maybe you explored the potential pros and cons of that.
Yeah. So for anyone listening who doesn't know what Ozempic is, it's essentially a kind of weight loss drug that was, I think it in the EU it's sold under a different name. I think it's called We Glove or something. I believe that's what it is. Anyway, it's this sort of miracle weight loss drug that was initially prescribed to people with diabetes who were obese. And the idea is that it suppresses your appetite. So you just want to eat less. And obviously this is not health or scientific advice, but the reality is, if you want, losing weight is about burning more calories than you ingest. And so Ozempic is a kind of cheat way for people to lose weight, because you can kind of continue to eat what you were eating before, if you like, but you just get full more quickly, so you don't want to eat so much of it. So there are all these case studies done, and it works very well in terms of its stated purpose of helping people who were obese lose weight. I can't recall the exact statistics, but it does work very well. And it's kind of went from being, I think, authorized for use only with people suffering from diabetes, who are overweight and suffering from diabetes, to, I think, obese, to people who I think were overweight. And don't quote me on the exact legality of it now, but I think you can basically be prescribed it by a doctor for being slightly overweight. And for anyone who wants to lose a little bit of weight, can have this kind of miracle drug. And it's very easy. It's just a kind of jab or a pill, or I think there's another way you can take it. So it's not particularly invasive. And there's some mad number of especially Americans who are on Ozempic at the moment. And some interesting stat that I remember from the episode was that it's manufactured by a Danish company. I can't exactly remember the name of the Danish company, but because they made this complete home run drug that brought in kind of tens of billions of dollars of revenue to the company, it actually had an impact on the Danish GDP figures. So essentially, you have this situation where this drug being sold, by doctors in every state of America, and being kind of used to help people lose weight, is kind of the money trail is going all the way back to Copenhagen, and helping support helping prop up the Danish pension system and so on. But yeah, it's a really interesting subject, because again, not health or medical advice here, but if it allows people to lose weight and therefore be more healthy, great. Because being obese is a bad thing for your health. That's a fact. And so on the one level, that is a good thing, but at the same time, it's not really addressing the root cause of the obesity problem, which is bad quality food and people not having enough exercise. So it's sort of you're not really solving the right problem. You're solving the disease rather than trying to find a cure for the actual issue. And the other thing too that I thought was kind of interesting about the ideas around Ozempic is that it's not the sort of thing, at least as I currently understand it, It's not the sort of thing that you like take it and then like you're sorted. You've lost weight. You're fine. Now your appetite is back to what it was before. No, you've got to keep on taking it every, where if it's every day or multiple times a week or so on. So people need to take it to have the same appetite levels. So let's say you were, yeah, I think so.
Wow.
And there's all these stories about people who were on Ozempic and lost lots of weight and it was fantastic. And then they thought, okay, great. Now I'm exactly the weight I want to be and it's perfect. And then you stop taking it and their appetite returns to its previous levels. And because they haven't made any fundamental changes to their lifestyle in terms of diet or exercise or anything like that, then they just go back. Right. Which clearly is very good news if you're the manufacturer of Ozempic, because I think it can be pretty expensive. I think it's kind of like $1,000 a month or so without insurance. And yeah, the way that the American health industry works is obviously pretty confusing, and there's all these different prices for how much a drug costs depending on how you get it. But it's an expensive drug, and you have this situation where potentially, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, of people around the world could be, kind of taking this appetite suppressing drug forever in order to stop them eating, stop eating too much bad food, which is a weird way to think about it. But yeah, it's a really interesting idea. Maybe I should make another episode revisiting it in a few years' time.
Yeah.
And I think
how it goes. Yeah.
In the UK, I think that it is now. I think it's available on the NHS for obesity. And I can't recall exactly how obesity is kind of classified, but I think it's not yet reached the level at which someone who is overweight and wants to lose a bit of weight can go to a Boots or a chemist and say, "Can I have some Ozempic, please?"
Right.
I believe, but no doubt, the manufacturers of the Ozempic are trying to change that.
It's a great business model, yeah, for sure. It's such an interesting thing because I think we're so mixed on it because, as you said it, I've heard someone say that that there may be side effects that we don't know about yet. We don't know everything, perhaps, but the health effects of obesity are so severe in every aspect of your health that it probably is worth it. Again, just like you said, it's not health advice. That's just one idea that I heard. But yeah, it's also very strange, a lot of people as well spend so much time eating healthy, exercising, and then it almost feels like other people are cheating, which is also a strange feeling. But
yeah. I guess it's sort of funny because as I said, that answer to losing weight is not particularly complicated. It might be hard to do, but it's like how to do it is not so difficult. Like the key is not so hard to find. It's not like if you have you have some terrible cancer in your body, then clearly that needs medical intervention for someone to fix that. You can't do that yourself. If you are, if you are obese, then a doctor can tell you what you need to do to stop being obese. But clearly it takes a lot of willpower and effort to do that. And that is really, really, really hard for lots of people. And this Ozempic drug provides a shortcut which can dramatically improve their life and improve their health outcomes, which is a good thing, in my opinion. And in terms of the side effects, I know that there have been lots of people sort of saying we don't know exactly what these side effects might be and blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, I know there's been like very extensive trials, and I guess the role of the FDA and all these different kinds of authorities that regulate drugs is to figure out whether there have been enough trials that have proven that there are not bad side effects. So I guess one has to trust that that they've done their job.
Yeah. Yeah, all super interesting. I feel like I for sure could just like look at all your episodes and just chat about each one for like an hour, just basically repeat each episode. But maybe we should finish up soon.
Yeah. I could also do that, but I also you'd end up catching me out a lot, as you've probably seen already, because I really want to talk to you about this particular thing you said in like episode number 91. Like, that was a long time ago. Let me just kind of remind myself of what happened and so on, because I do end up doing so much research and writing so much that it doesn't quite kind of go in one ear and come out the other, but it doesn't stay in my mind permanently.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And if you don't mind me saying so, we spoke about inspirational people at the beginning, and I feel like you're inspiring me in many ways. I think your curiosity in each area is quite inspiring, and maybe that's something that I'll bring more into my own podcast as well, about following my curiosity in each episode. So yeah, it's inspiring as a podcaster and a teacher, I would say.
Well, I watched your video about cycling 1,000 kilometers around Taiwan, and that certainly inspired me. I've done some cycling trips, but nothing nearly as adventurous as that. So, yeah. Next time you go to Taiwan. Although I did get to the end, and you said I wouldn't recommend this. So, yeah, maybe I haven't checked and seen if there's another video about another large cycling trip. If you have one of those, then I'll watch that one. But that was certainly an inspiration to me.
Yeah, there isn't yet, but here's a little preview of my plans for the year. There might be in a few months' time. We'll see. So it hasn't put me off cycling.
Yeah, where are you? Where is a potential destination?
Incidentally, one of the places with a population crisis, I'm thinking about South Korea at the moment.
Okay,
because they're supposed to have a very good cycling trail going across the country. Not around this time, but north to south. So need to do a bit more research and see if that is doable. But yeah, let's see.
Yeah, Andrew from the Culips English podcast. I'm not sure if you've ever spoken to him. He lives in South Korea and is a cyclist, and I think he is. I remember talking to him about how it's funny, kind of cycling around South Korea. He says everyone in South Korea's got very good cycling gear. So, yeah, that's my one little bit of information about the cycling scene in South Korea. I can't add any more value than that.
Well, thank you for saying that. Maybe that could be a great potential future guest on that topic if he's willing to do that. But we'll see.
I don't know if he's an expert or not on South Korean cycling, but I know he has a bike and he lives in South Korea. So
a very unique position, I'm sure. Yeah.
There we go. And he has an English podcast. There's probably the people who live in South Korea, have a bike and have an English podcast. He's probably at the center of that.
Yes. Nice. Well, maybe if you don't mind, you could mention where people can find you just one last time.
Sure. So the podcast that I make is called English Learning for Curious Minds. It is available wherever you get your podcasts. So, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, on YouTube too, although it's just audio only. And if you want to find out more about everything that I do, it's at leonardoenglish.com.
Perfect. Fantastic. And I think you've also got Instagram, Facebook, maybe. So I can link those up as well if you like.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Very nice. Go ahead.
I was going to say thank you so much for having me on, Michael. It was a pleasure to chat. And I love what you're doing with Level Up as well.
Thank you so much. You've been very kind, and it's been so nice to talk. Maybe we'll have to come back again to talk about cycling or whatever else is on the table. But yeah, thank you again.
When I make the episode about Cornelis Drebbel, then I can come and tell you about that one.
Yes, please. Yeah, thank you so much. See you later.
Thanks. Bye.
You have been listening to the Level Up English podcast. If you would like to leave a question to be answered on a future episode, then please go to levelupenglish.school/podcast. That's levelupenglish.school/podcast. And I'll answer your question on a future episode. Thanks for listening.